Hello, I'm Kai Rosga, and welcome to Version Up, one lawyer's journey to digitally transform his legal practice. Hi, Gwendolyn. Thanks for joining Version Up.
My pleasure. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk antitrust and tech with you. It's not something I get to do too often on the podcast, so thank you for coming on.
It's my pleasure. I love talking about antitrust and tech early in the morning.
Yeah, and we'll try for everyone's benefit. We won't get too nerdy, but I think it'll be really helpful to root the conversation in specifics. And that's what's great about talking to people who develop these tailored tools, as I call them, as opposed to some of the more off-the-shelf stuff. But before we get to all that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you find yourself in the legal tech world?
Sure. So I was Wisconsin's Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust for about 20 years. And so in that time, one of the things that Assistant Attorneys General do is they do conduct investigations for antitrust, but you also investigate mergers. So there's kind of two groups of folks who investigate mergers in the country. There's federal enforcers, and then state enforcers also investigate mergers. And, quite famously, the states, including me, challenged the T-Mobile and Sprint merger. So part of my job was to investigate mergers, probably investigated over 100 mergers in my time. And I was both chair of the Antitrust Task Force, which meant that I led all the state attorneys general in the country in their antitrust enforcement efforts. That's about 270 people. And that meant that I got to share the stage with people like Jonathan Cantor and Lena Khan. Lena, you might have heard of. She was the chair of the Federal Trade Commission in the Biden administration. And we would be on stage and be asked questions about artificial intelligence. And they would often talk about algorithmic pricing and algorithmic collusion. And I had nothing to add to that conversation that they hadn't already said. So I started to think about artificial intelligence should be something that is used by enforcers, right? There's such opportunity with artificial intelligence. And so at that same time, I also had about 5 hospital merger investigations at the same time. And while I was the antitrust chief for the state of Wisconsin, which is super cool, I was also the antitrust cook and bottle washer. So it was just me. So when we had these 5 hospital mergers at the same time, and I was like, which one should I investigate? And then I thought, you know what? This is where artificial intelligence would come in really useful for me to say, investigate this one, not that one, without doing the 15 hours per merger of research to figure out which was which. I mean, I ended up doing it by hand, of course, but I mean, that idea from that situation, right? Necessity is the mother of invention, and that was the example there.
I love the enforcer's perspective. On the podcast, I hear about, of course, vendors that have developed tools and are selling them to the big corporate law firms. Of course, also in-house clients. I'm an in-house lawyer, so I hear all about vendors making pitches on products that they are marketing to legal departments of large corporates. What you don't hear as much is the genesis story of a legal tech product being from the perspective of an enforcer. That's quite unique. Do you think that gave you an edge or in terms of identifying a need in the market, given that everyone in the defense space, of course, is following the lead and looking at what enforcers are doing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I don't know if it gave me an edge, but it certainly gave me insight into what the problem was. But I think that the problem that I was identifying is actually pretty universal throughout the chain, right? Folks who are in-house, they get asked, can you give me an assessment of the antitrust risk? I know it's, 10 o'clock, 2 days before Christmas, but can you, by noon, give me an assessment of which one of these 3 acquisitions is going to create the most antitrust risk for us, right? In firms, they're making pitches. They want to make sure they understand the markets and want to be able to assess the antitrust risk, right? Enforcers have that same need, right? So it's throughout the chain that folks are really trying to analyze it. So I think that's one of the reasons why this is such an
Hmm.
appealing idea. Um, I think the only real advantage of being an enforcer, if we're totally honest, is enforcers don't get paid nearly as much money as private antitrust practitioners do. So it was a lot more risk preferred because of what my life looked like compared to those folks in the defense bar making a couple $1 million a year.
Yeah, I mean, the incentives are different, right? Big law deploying technology is always running into a business model question, which is, am I lowering revenue in one way, and am I offsetting that through either a cost savings to me or through higher revenue in some other way? I guess the government, obviously not generating revenue, they only are looking at efficiency, effectiveness, and cost savings, right?
They are somewhat looking at efficiency, effectiveness, and cost savings. I would say certainly not exclusively. I think what they're looking for, and I'm very idealistic about this, but I think in my experience, what they're looking for by and large is justice, because justice is cost effective and time
Mhm.
saving, right? And so that's why it matters which one. You don't want to waste time and money investigating the hospital merger that didn't need to be investigated. You want to, and right, didn't need to be investigated because justice says that one would have been pro competitive, in fact.
The product you're developing, the way you were using it initially, was really taking a triage approach, right? You're doing sort of like a quick first level. I'm not looking to hit a home run. I'm just trying to like create the negative space, right? I'm trying to get the things off my plate that I know don't require my attention. And then once I land on the thing that does require my attention, human brain kicks in, human work kicks in. And that's sort of where, when we talk about AI being used to move up the value chain or have lawyers focus on more strategic work, to me, this is already sort of hitting those themes. Do
Uh,
you agree?
listeners, I did not pay Kaj to say this. I swear to God. But the first T, Taimet is an acronym. The first T of Taimet is triage. Triage,
There we go.
artificial
We
intelligence.
can stop there, Gwendolyn. We're done. We can call it a day.
Exactly. Triage, artificial intelligence, merger evaluation tool.
I love that. So tell us how it works.
Okay, so it analyzes antitrust risk in mergers, right? It does a market overlap analysis. It compares to merger guidelines. It compares to cases in the industry. It then ultimately will, after doing that full analysis, and that's like the most high level overview of a very intricate, complicated analysis, then ultimately it will score on a scale of 1 to 100 how likely a merger is to be challenged in court. It's not a probabilistic score. It is a kind of, if you score 1 through 25, you're likely to be early terminated. If you score 25 through 50, you're likely to possibly have a slightly longer investigation or, and so on, right? 96 through 100 means a court's going to block you.
So the output as a user is I'm getting a number.
You're getting a number, and then you're getting a report that is very much like the reports I would give the Attorney General when I was briefing him during my time in office.
So it's almost like a memo, internal memo that I'm getting that summarizes why did this deal get an 85 score, for example.
Yeah, I mean, with the support, right? It does full market analysis. And so then right, because this is a sophisticated tool for sophisticated users, the report has some really intricate details about the market. So you can look at that and say, I think that market's too narrow. Or you can say, I think that market's dead on. On the inside, I'll just say, we have part of our prompting is to determine both broad and narrow markets and figure out which is the most appropriate based on the situation. So, but we want users to really dig into the reports. And so we provide it as straightforwardly as we possibly can.
So let me ask a product design question out of my own curiosity here.
Oh, fun.
How did you land on the output being a number combined with this sort of substantive discussion? Was there along the way, were there other ideas that ended up being thrown out, or did you always have in mind, I'm going to have a grade or a number?
So the initial Genesis idea was I wanted a number, but I also needed a report, right? I wanted essentially to create what I needed to analyze those 5 hospital transactions. Tell me which one is the most important first, but then tell me why. Because, a good lawyer is never going to just trust you can't just give me a number. I will never trust you. So I want to see why. I want to see the sources for how you got to that information. So then I can say, yep, I think that's right. So trying to make it easier when you're talking to a client who's, wants to know in 2 hours exactly which markets are going to overlap.
Yeah, and lawyers are, by nature or by training, we are skeptical, we are inquisitive, we want to test assumptions. So when I look at the report, how much am I able to see into sort of the thinking or logic or judgment calls that are being made by the AI behind the curtain, so to speak?
Yeah, currently the end part of currently we're using EndNotes and the entire report is EndNoted. So you can go back and see where the sources are. The sources we typically use are, we have done curated sources. They're all public sources. That's the other thing, because when I was in the Wisconsin AG's office, often did not have access to the parties' documents because they would play games with me, so not give them to me. So I was able to actually just figure it out. Most of that stuff is available publicly anyway. So it's all public documents or proprietary databases that are available to the public that we pay for. And so we are going through and analyzing all of those. It is not just saying we think the market share is X, right? It is saying we think the market share is X. And you can see in the end notes, there's a whole bunch of SEC reports that say why it thinks that. It also has currently a confidence score, just high, medium, low, based on how easy it is to get that information. Easier for some things, right? Large companies that are publicly traded, they file those reports. Smaller companies, a little bit harder, right? You don't have a good sense of market share because they don't have the kind of public data. And so those end up being a little lower confidence. But I've found it is impressively good at this. I will say, I occasionally will send flaming emoji type emails of OMG, I think it's made a mistake to my co-founder. And then he'll be like, I just looked at this report and on the internet, and that actually is totally right. And you're wrong, Gwendolyn. So it's doing a more thorough job because it's faster. It's doing a more thorough job than what I think particularly experienced lawyers like me ended up doing, which was relying more on instinct and less on facts. And this gives you the facts that you can then use your instinct to say, yep, I think that's right or not.
Yeah, I'll give you my perspective as an in-house lawyer who does M&A work. I've been in private practice. I did M&A work as well as an antitrust lawyer. And what's appealing about the number is the simplicity because the client, and so ultimately there's like a business person, a deal person who is being advised, whether by outside counsel, whether by me, in-house counsel, there's a business person being advised on what's the chances of this deal running into issues with regulators, and they always want a number. And we as lawyers always give them, if we're good lawyers, we give them a 1-page or 2-page deck that gives them a bit of a narrative around probability, maybe worded in a kind of wordy kind of way. But we always are very cautious to give probabilities or numbers. But that's really ultimately what the end client often wants, is they just want to know, like, give me a number and I can figure out what that risk is. I can see if I tolerate it, et cetera. So I think the number to me hits a key part of the demand from the end client, right? The person who's really making the business decision. And then the way that it reaches that number and the generation of the report hits this sort of transparency and traceability that the lawyer now wants to see, right? Because the lawyer wants to be able to answer questions, because if they just give a number to the end client's going to have questions, right? And the lawyer's going to need to explain, how do we get to that number? We need to kind of peel the layers of the onion back. So it's interesting, you kind of have hit, I think, both of those needs, right? From the lawyer's perspective, the advisor's perspective, they need that transparency and traceability and all that kind of detail. But the end client often really, and you have to be careful how you use a number, of course, but that's kind of what they're always trying to push you towards. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah. And I think not to get too nerdy for your listeners, but there's this number in antitrust analysis, in merger analysis, called HHI, the Herfindahl-Hirschman Index. And it's a pretty straightforward mathematical equation. And it's kind of accurate, but it's not sufficiently useful, right? So the Taimet reports incorporate that HHI number, but right, it's basically like, where are you between 0 and 10,000, right? And if you're over 1,800 as of the 2023 merger guidelines, right? Like, oh, well, then you might possibly, but nobody really knows what the threshold of like, oh, if you score this, then you will get this, right? Because there's more to it than HHI. And what Taimet does is try to capture the more to it as well as this HHI number. So then you can have that number with a little bit more confidence of what's actually going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, and if I can go one more layer down, you mentioned some of these enforcers from the previous administration. And from what I recall, some of the thinking behind their approach to merger enforcement was to move towards something a little more simplistic and what we call structural in the antitrust world, which is let's have something a little more objective that we can use to screen for potentially problematic deals. Let's not get into the weeds of looking at every single factor out the gate. And the HHI is the shorthand that's been used, right, for making that sort of structural analysis up front. But what you're offering is maybe another kind of step in the direction of some more complexity, but still a number that kind of gives you some sort of quick screen, right? And it's sort of a
Exactly.
structural almost, yeah.
Exactly. And it does more than just, so this, again, to bore your listeners to tears, the structural presumption is guideline 1 in the merger guidelines. And so this also incorporates all the rest of the merger guidelines, which is a 99-page document that outlines how we should do merger enforcement in this country, right? So, right, incorporating those 99 pages into something that you can actually use and give to a human being who actually does not want to talk about HHIs or diversion ratios.
That's really interesting. Let's assume that this product is great at assessing mergers. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt on that. I look forward to
Thank you.
trying it out myself. Now comes the part where you have to go and convince people of that and sell this product. What are some of the tough questions you've had to answer as you go out and talk to antitrust lawyers about the product?
I wouldn't necessarily call them tough, but I think pointed questions, particularly how it's different. First of all, just about artificial intelligence generally, right? There's some skepticism about artificial intelligence generally, and how is Taimet better than, for example, just why can't I just use ChatGPT? Well, I don't know if anybody's ever tried to analyze a merger just using ChatGPT. And to be clear, I adore ChatGPT, so they should please not sue me. I think it's absolutely fabulous for when I want to find out which hotel I should stay at when I visit Manhattan next. Things like that, fabulous. I love it. However,
You can
Taimet,
call me, by the way, next time you want recommendations. I'm based in New York, so.
great, there you go. Right. Do you have recommendations for a hotel in Midtown? I will just email you
Yeah.
rather than asking ChatGPT. But Taimet's sophisticated, right? It researches, it filters, it reasons, and I am really consistently amazed by it. And I use it in my own practice, right? So to me, that's the proof. It's like having that army of paralegals that I really wanted when I was in the AG's office.
Mhm.
The thing about the fear of artificial intelligence, I had somebody once say, I mean, is it really artificial intelligence? People claim artificial intelligence isn't everything. And I feel like I had agentic AI breakfast cereal today. And I was like, yeah, like there is so much jargon and a lot of it is sloppy jargon, right? Artificial intelligence, but it's really
Mhm.
machine learning, or it's agentic. But like, what does that even mean?
Yes.
Sorry to peek behind the screen here, but okay, yes. So Taimet is, I guess, also agentic, but it is a sophisticated tool for sophisticated users. And I think it's ultimately the way forward in the way that there was skepticism. I'm an old enough lawyer to remember about the skepticism about using the
The cloud.
oh, certainly the cloud. Oh my goodness. You don't even have to be very old. Like
Yeah.
we were not allowed to
Yeah.
put documents on the cloud because that was be terrible. But even I was thinking about just research generally, like Westlaw and LexisNexis. Like that wasn't even. I was trained how to look cases up in books, and if you went to a client and presented them now with your research billing, and it was because you had spent that time looking it up in books when you could have searched it online, I think ultimately clients are going to demand that there is not 1 gajillion hours for background research that could have been done with an artificial intelligence tool in the same way that essentially all the competition, all the lawyers, we are all on Westlaw, LexisNexis, Veritex, whatever, because it's faster.
And I, as someone who was in private practice for a decade, now an in-house attorney, the client side, I have seen the trajectory of how the industry has moved away from the show your work approach, 30-page memos. As the cost of legal services goes up, as the pressure for cost savings goes up at corporates, what we see more and more is just give me the bottom line, right? And I'm paying a lot of money because I know in the background you're doing a lot of work to get to that answer, but I don't need the 30-page memo. And that used to not be the case, right? I remember working just prior practice 6, 7 years ago. Sometimes you'd pull up the previous work product that went to a client, and sometimes it might be 10, 15 years old. And you'd see these 30-page memos on topics you would never give a client a memo on anymore. So to me, this sounds like Taimet is also moving in that direction at the same time, which is that clients just expect a simpler, quicker answer, even though they want the sophistication, of course, and they want the accuracy.
And they want, I mean, let's be honest. I bet if you looked at the literary quality of those 30-page memos, it would be, excuse me, but crap,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if you're more sophisticated, you can be shorter.
Yeah.
And that's what these reports are designed to be. One of the things that artificial intelligence, I think we universally can agree, artificial intelligence is pretty good at writing. And right, because it's the whole foundation of an LLM is it's predicting the next correct word, right? So it's pretty good at writing a sentence. And so being able to be concise is crucial. And we are consistently, my business partner is constantly telling me TLDR.
Of course. This is, yeah. We can thank
To,
Silicon Valley for that. I think
yeah,
that it's been
exactly.
injected everywhere. This is often the tip that in-house lawyers give to private practice attorneys. It's always like, hey, just give us the bottom line. And it can be really hard. If you've been doing private practice at a law firm for 10, 15 years, it can be really difficult. The idea of just like giving a client a number, right? Or giving them a really short email can be frightening because you think, oh, there's all this nuance they're not going to get. And there's always the risk issue, right? When you need to be very clear as an outside lawyer, what your assumptions are, all that. But you put that at the bottom of the email, right? What goes at the top is a very short bullet point list of things. And if there was a number, that would be even better. And again, you can give the whole picture, but if you can give something that's simple and easy to present, very valuable, I think, from the client's perspective. As long as it's robust, as long as it's accurate, and as long as the assumptions are set out.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the Attorney General of the state of Wisconsin and the attorneys general across the country do not have time. They are busy people, right? And they did not have time to read a 30-page memo. So I was taught when I started at the AG's office that my memo should never be longer than 5 paragraphs. It's tough to analyze a merger in 5 paragraphs. So they were a little longer than that, but they were not much longer. And it had to include things like how much is it going to cost us to bring this case? So, that is really the approach that I'm taking, right? That's that advantage of being an enforcer. I wasn't getting paid by the hour, right? I was getting paid to provide results and do justice and set the attorney general up for success in a way that when I met with him, he'd be like, yes, I actually did read your memo. And aren't you hilarious?
What is your target user? So far, the ones I've heard are potentially public, right? Government enforcers, law firms, corporates, maybe there's others, maybe there's economists, maybe advisors. Who are your target users?
You've nailed four of the five, and the
What's the fifth
fifth,
one?
investors who are interested in merger transactions,
Oh, sure, like arbitrage or just private
event,
equity or
right,
yeah.
event
Sure.
driven and equity and stuff like that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Sophisticated users, though, right?
Yeah.
Really want people who understand the complexities of antitrust, because this isn't really, I've always said that antitrust isn't for dabblers, um, except for your listeners who are like, I feel like I'm dabbling in antitrust right now. But, right, and this tool is not for dabblers either, right? It's for those people who are sophisticated enough to be able to say, I think that based on my experience, this market is right on, or this market is too narrow, or I think that there's this other factor that this report doesn't know about, that because I have access to the inside information, I can say, but they don't know that there's this thing going on, right? So you need to have a sophisticated user for that. And right, and so those groups all do. But that's basically everybody who touches M&A in this country.
Sure, sure. Have you had conversations yet, or have you thought about answering questions from a law firm client surrounding, well, what does this mean for my business? Currently, I have a small team that does a quick analysis for me, and they generate revenue for the law firm by billing hours. If I just cut to the chase like this, and I'm not going to potentially have as much revenue coming in from that work, or have you fielded those questions, or I'm sure you've thought about it at least, or how you would kind of address that issue of the business model, how it impacts that?
Yeah, and I think it's a lot like using tools like Westlaw or LexisNexis or VLEX. And that is, the trend is going to be that you can't justify your 20 paralegal hours researching a thing that could have been researched faster, right? And so
Yeah.
ultimately, I think that you can either use it as a marketing tool on the front end, or you can be left behind and be like, I wonder why your clients are challenging your bills that seem too high to them, because the kinds of people who are doing mergers that are reportable in this country, right? That this year it's $126 million threshold, 126.4 if we want to be specific. But right, that's a pretty sophisticated user. Those are people who are going to be looking at the bill and thinking about what that bill includes. They're not going to be small firms who don't have accountants, right? So you really want to make sure that you are doing that. You as a law firm are on the cutting edge of the technology, and that you are not, kind of behind the eight ball on this, right? Like you want to be out front and be able to, yeah, there's still going to be plenty of billable hours to go around, because you still do need to check it. You need to analyze it and read through the reports and make sure that it's correct.
Well, I guess I could ask you, you still practice, right? You still represent clients. How have you worked it into your practice? And how visible is it to the client, I guess, someone like me, like a corporate?
Yeah, I mean, so uh, I would say the way I use the tool personally is, it is a perfect analysis, because I can run it every day to see what's going on with a specific transaction. Is it more likely to be challenged today than it was yesterday? And so I'm looking at it for both, what are the market overlaps, because I will admit that I don't actually have a grasp on every single industry in the entire country, that sometimes I forget which markets are this one and not that one. And so reminding myself which markets it is, because I can just pull the report back up. And then I'm looking at the score to see what is happening to it over time. Oh, this specific merger, that looks like that one's definitely going to be second requested. I mean, many of the larger mergers, I have a sense of what will happen to them. But sometimes there's mergers like an iron ductile pipe merger that is not an industry that, like, off the top of my head, I know what the state of consolidation is. I mean, I do actually, because there was that big FTC case. But I think that's right. Like, that's not something that's on the top of your mind.
Yeah, no, for sure. If you had a wish list of additional features or things that you would love to see built up around what Taimet already offers, would you think about other applications, or would you just continue to bolster the core tool? What are your thoughts on where things can go from here?
One of the issues that Taimet cannot yet solve, and we're seeing this across the country with lawyers who are getting slapped down by courts for citation problems. The reason why, and here, dear listeners, if you are a lawyer, you should not be using artificial intelligence to do your brief writing, because the whole idea is it predicts the next correct word, which is not the way that a court wrote the words in the first place, right? It is a trend predictor. It is not a regurgitator of things. And so it's very difficult. Even if you've given it extremely narrow parameters, it's very difficult for it to say, okay, of all the mergers that have ever taken place, my analysis is this case is the relevant one, and this is the one that would be applied, right? That is still, for now, the purview of lawyers. Because artificial intelligence, I have been consistently trying to get it to do that, and it's not good enough. It's not good enough, and it's not included in Taimet's analysis. And so but I will tell you, every developer version of every LLM, I am consistently testing it to see if it can do it. Because once we can do that, then that unlocks a lot more value, I think, for users, because having that quick, these are the cases that you need, I think is going to be so useful. But we're not there yet. And so please, everyone, stop using particularly the Claudes or the ChatGPTs for your legal citation, because unless you're really, really checking it, because it's not quotation marks hallucinating, it's just trend predicting. And that's how you end up with bad, imaginary cases that, sound really plausible.
How do you currently measure the temperature of the legal industry's interest and success at implementing AI tools? And what is your current read on where we are as an industry and what the potential is over the next couple of years?
I think that you've said before, right, that lawyers are inherently skeptical, right? And so we recognize the marketing value of saying that artificial intelligence is something we're doing. There are a number of firms who've talked about their products that they're developing with Harvey. And I think part of that is to, show to their clients that they're on the cutting edge, or that if their client has an artificial intelligence thing, that we know everything about artificial intelligence. We've got an artificial intelligence committee, but we are not there yet because we are skeptical. We know that lawyers across the country are getting slapped in court for erroneous citations and things like that. And so we're just at the beginnings.
Yeah, I have like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde experience in this, because I'll go to a conference or go on my LinkedIn feed and the future is here. And if you don't use all the AI tools today, you're going to be out of a job in 6 months. And then I talk to lawyers. I survey lawyers all the time, lawyers at large, corporate law firms, lawyers in-house. And the actual stage of implementation is way, way earlier. And there's this disconnect. I really can see it in my experience. But where I do see the most potential, I would love to hear your thoughts on this, is in niche tailored tools that are sold for very specific purposes to very particular users. Whether that's something people develop internally using something like Legora, like as a platform, right, for developing automated workflows, whether they have kind of a Copilot Studio you can do a lot with, or whether they go out and purchase a third-party product, right, that's been developed for a particular need. Where I see people have these kind of aha moments is there, and less so in the real big picture stuff, like you just said, like, oh, it's going to write my brief for me, or it's going to, come up with all my legal arguments. Does that match with your experience or your thoughts on where we are in the industry?
Absolutely, because the response I've gotten on Taimet from antitrust lawyers, I mean, I know this I swear, all of you who are listening, this is not puffery. So I had an associate start crying when I described Taimet to her. She said something to the effect of, "That's all my dreams come true." Because this is the niche, right?
Mm.
She gets asked that at 8 p.m. on a Friday, and they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry if you had plans. I need this by 10 o'clock." Right?
Yeah.
She's like, "Ugh, I just wanted to go to sleep or whatever. Right? So, right. These niches are the things that really are working. I'm glad that there are people working on the big problems because I've read a lot of briefs in my time. Some of them really could use some help, but
Yeah.
it's for folks who have the credibility to say, you know, I this is a tool that I've created and I think it can work for you.
Yeah. And I think we used the word triage earlier, but that might be an oversimplification because if you assume these users are very sophisticated, which they are, they're going to figure out pretty quickly what's the right way to use this tool and what's not. As a lawyer representing multiple clients at a law firm, you will get a bunch of inquiries, and some of them are, okay, I need to give a really quick answer. And
Hmm.
you know the client, you know what the client needs, and you know this client's expecting you to give an answer tomorrow morning, and it's going to be a 60% confidence interval answer, but they need it quick, and they know that it's going to be a 60% confidence interval. So then one tool might work. Maybe that's like a great use case for Taimet. But then you're going to have a massive M&A transaction with huge stakes, huge cost. You already know it's a deal that's going to get a detailed inquiry from the government. You're going to pay a huge law firm tons of money to do a massive inquiry into all the data, all the documents, right? You're going to prepare all the arguments. And in that situation, maybe you skip using Taimet. I'm not trying to limit your applications, but my point being, what I think is interesting about niche tools, tailored tools, is you're sort of addressing the actual needs of the user. They have very different needs based on what the client wants, what kind of deal they're looking at, what's the budget constraints, lots of different factors that they know because they know their clients, they know their business, and they don't need the same tool for everything.
I think that's true. I think to a certain extent, ultimately, um, because of its usefulness, we will see that even on the giant deals, they will have also done that because it is what Tamet is really designed to do is to help replace HHI,
Hmm.
provide that more detailed answer, that more
Hmm.
sophisticated answer than just an HHI analysis. So,
Merger guidelines 2030 are going to have
right,
Taimet with
Tamet
a little
score.
trademark next to it. It's going to have a Taimet score.
Right, right. Plus, we can dream.
Gwendolyn, let me wrap up with you've been in this interesting journey, practicing lawyer, legal tech founder. What advice do you have for other lawyers who are thinking about becoming legal tech founders and have an idea that they would love to put out into the world?
Yeah. So, first, make sure that you really are a domain expert. It is so much easier. I don't think I could have done this if I didn't know as much about mergers as I do. And I've still had to go back to the well and do some deep research, sometimes even in books. Um, and then, most importantly, find yourself a really, really good technical co founder. And that is not an easy thing to do. I have had a little bit of trial and error as I've been on this journey. But, you know, taking the advice from as many people as I've met with as I've tried to build this tool and doing essentially the comprehensive networking I needed to do in order to find a really good co founder, like that was so important. And I've talked to folks from giant tech companies and tiny little startups and people whose brothers in law's fathers were also involved in tech, right? So having that broad base and hearing all of the different kinds of advice was so helpful. I have to say, though, if I had to do it all over again, I think one of the hardest things was figuring out who to listen to when I was getting that broad swath of advice. And the answer is just get as much as you can and you'll figure it out for yourself. But once you find that technical co founder, if you are lucky, as I have been, it can be an amazing relationship to figure out like, how do you think? And that's what this has been a journey of, is figuring out how I actually analyze a merger instead of just, well, of course, this one's going to get challenged. Why are you even asking me this?
Yeah, very different brain, different approach to problem solving with technical people and lawyers. And I find the part about domain expertise inspiring and really interesting because as lawyers, and after 10, 15 more years of answering questions, solving problems, we can lose sight of the fact that we're developing this really niche expertise along the way, and that expertise has a unique value, and not just in answering emails or meeting with clients to give them a merger assessment. It goes beyond that. That expertise has value outside of just the traditional practice of law. And to me, that's one of the most exciting things about this whole legal tech revolution we're going through is you're seeing all these positions coming up, legal AI engineer, subject matter advisor, and it all comes back to the same thing, which is you have people with great technical expertise. Maybe they're really good at knowing how to build successful products and how to sell them. But what they don't know is what problem are they trying to solve and how do you solve it? And for that, they really need someone that understands the area of the law, but also how you service clients, the business of law. And that's where experienced lawyers come in,
Exactly.
which it's good to know. We have a few other outs other than, the same revolving door. So thank you for Gwendolyn, thank you for coming on and thank you for giving us a real world example of just how a lawyer can go on that journey. Really appreciate
Well,
it.
my pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah.